Welcome to Signal. Woo! Signal! My name is Evan. I run the IoT business unit here at Twilio. How many people first Signal? How many people second Signal? Wow. Okay, cool. Lots of new folks. Welcome. Signal is always a great time. I think there's, for a few of us in the room, this is like our 6th or 7th. And I'm here to talk to you today about IoT, and in particular, a certain type of IoT that Twilio has been playing in. What I will be talking to you about today is a lot of the industry and why we're excited about it and the trends and what we see going on and these various things. What I will not be talking to you about today very specifically is how to take advantage of a lot of these trends from a technical perspective, let's say, and how you might actually go about building, prototyping, and that type of thing. But don't worry. My colleagues have that all taken care of. We have other talks today on our SuperSim product from Andrew. Matt is talking about our product overview and all of the functionality that we provide. Matt just walked in. Thanks, Matt. Right on time. And then also today and tomorrow we have workshops. We have workshops on building narrowband devices. We have workshops on building high-powered devices connecting to Azure and all that type of thing. But what I am here to talk to you about today is why this is interesting. And specifically, I would like to convince you largely of 3 things. One is that there is an IoT explosion happening, and that very specifically it may not be the IoT explosion that comes to your mind when you hear that term IoT. Secondly, that this explosion, this trend, a mega trend if you will, is creating entrepreneurial white space, that is to say entrepreneurial opportunity, and that there is a developer platform emerging that is considerable and perhaps even larger than the entrepreneurial opportunities created by the PC, the web, and mobile. The third thing that I would like to convince you of is that now is the perfect time as a developer and entrepreneur to be getting into this space. And the reason that we believe that this is the perfect time, I'll give you a little teaser, is that it's not too early. Things are not impossible anymore, but it's also not too late. This is not one of those situations where you have an idea for a mobile app and you get all excited about it and you go online to register the domain and there's already 12 companies doing exactly the same thing. So these are the 3 things that I would like to convince you of today. Was anyone here in attendance at my pathetic excuse for a narrowband talk last year? Okay, a couple people. No easy button today, but we will be talking a little bit about hype. IoT talk, no IoT talk is complete without a little hype, which I find crazy. It's a multi-$100 billion industry with about a 20% compound annual growth rate. But let's look at some numbers anyway. $17 billion of VC poured into IoT startups in Q4, no joke. 20 billion plus single-purpose computing type devices on the internet today. That is to say, devices that are not mobile phones or PCs or laptops. So we're well past the era where there's one per person. And the third, and this is probably, I think, the most mind-blowing statistic, especially if you're someone who spends most of their day thinking about cloud computing and the cloud and not about IoT, is that there are 127 new IoT devices connecting to the internet every second, which is pretty phenomenal to try and conceptualize in your head there. So when most of us think of IoT, we think about this stuff. We think about consumer electronics. We think about light bulbs, and we think about thermostats. And actually, this is quite a valid place for your mind to go for a number of reasons. The first would be, of course, that we all watch television, and we see the Super Bowl commercials, and it's all about Alexa, and it's all about Google Home and these types of things. The second reason that that is valid is that right now, more than 60% of all IoT device shipments are consumer electronics devices. And it's actually very unlikely that that will change. However, it doesn't really matter because the number of shared devices that are shipping is so massive. But I want to talk a little bit about this smart home space, we might call it, and also a little bit about why I'm not focusing on that in my talk today when I talk about entrepreneurial white space. Not to say that there is not opportunity in this space, I'm sure there is. But this space is very much dominated by 4 very large companies. Actually, it's not fair to say 4. There are more, but it's sort of the usual suspects, the likes of Amazon, who's acquired Ring, of course, Google, who acquired Nest, Samsung acquired SmartThings. All of these companies have a TV product. All of these companies have a smart speaker product. These are the same companies, if you think about it, that initially battled, they fought a war to be the computer on your desk. And then when that war was over, they fought a war to be the computer in your pocket, right? And now they're essentially battling to become the computer that you live inside of. There is a very heated smart home war going on now that the smartphone war has largely wrapped up. And this market is fiercely competitive, largely homogeneous, and sort of winner takes all. So you have to understand, as an entrepreneur entering into this type of space, you will be competing against Amazon, who's making these devices, and Amazon will be pushing these devices through their retail channels, through all of their power that they have as one of the world's largest technology companies. Now, again, I'm not saying this is not a super interesting space, but I think the space that we are going to talk about today is significantly more interesting from an entrepreneurial perspective. So let's talk about some examples in this space very, very quickly. And the first is a little bit of a stretch, but maybe stay with me. Uber. You may not think of Uber as an IoT company, and in fact, most people probably wouldn't. But in my mind, it is. And in fact, it maybe is an IoT company in the truest sense of the term. And the reason for that is that their business and their entire user experience is premised around this idea of taking physical resources from the real world, and modeling those in software, making those objects into interactive participants in a digital system. And whenever I tell someone, well, I think of Uber as an IoT company, their response is normally, that's stupid. And then my response is, well, what if the cars drove themselves? And then almost everyone comes around to the idea that, like, oh yeah, actually probably that would be considered an IoT company. But the reason I actually choose Uber as the example to use here first is not because it's top of mind as an IoT company, as I just mentioned. Obviously, it's not. It's because of the nature of the system that existed before it. And I think this is a really important pattern as we start to think about IoT and how we can change the world with IoT. This is how we used to get a cab. You would go and stand on the street and you would raise your hand in the air and you would hope that a cab drove past you. And if you were a cab driver, you would do the opposite thing. You would get in your cab and you would literally just drive around and around and around and around and around, and you would hope that you saw someone with their hand in the air. In software, we would refer to this as a brute force algorithm. Essentially, you were just hoping for a collision. You were hoping that things would pan out and that something would transact. And my message to you is, whenever you see brute force out in the physical world, out in the economy, out in the city, out on the farm, anywhere like that, whenever you see brute force like this, it represents an information gap. And in IoT, we can actually close these information gaps. We can use the sensors and the networks that are available to us to bring context of the physical world into our software. And I was actually at a talk yesterday by one of my colleagues, Nico, who runs our machine learning team at Twilio. And he said this. He said, if you can bring a problem into the world of software, you can solve it. And of course, he's talking about this from the notion of ML. There's a whole bunch of problems that historically have not been solvable by computers that are now solvable by computers through ML. But this is equally as applicable to IoT and to the physical world. All of these problems, that problem of how do I get a cab at the right time, that problem was not solvable without bringing all of those objects and their representations into software. But once you bring them into software, then you can solve them. And here you go. This is objects in software. Location, utilization, capacity, availability. These are real-world objects that are becoming interactive participants in a digital system. And that allows us to solve a problem that previously we solved with brute force. So I have a slightly nuanced way that I describe this, which is that with IoT, we empower our software systems by giving them the ultimate context, the true state of the physical world. Many of you will have seen these micro-mobility companies scattered around the cities of the world. Scooters and bikes that are available for on-demand sharing. You may not have actually thought about the fact that all of those are individually connected to the internet. They're all connected to a cellular network, because that is how you get the context of where are they? Are they available right now? What is the battery level? So taking that Uber example a little bit further to Lime, and you look at Lime and you go, oh yeah, that's obvious. Like, that is an IoT system. And it's really just about, like, it's really a software system. But the software is able to capture that context from the physical world and create a useful user experience. And again, the user experience looks almost exactly the same, right? Location, utilization, capacity, and availability. Real-world objects as interactive participants in a digital software system. What I would like you to come away with from today is the notion that what we're staring down the barrel of with this type of pattern is a huge entrepreneurial opportunity. We, obviously at Twilio, we're a developer company. We love developers. I don't know if you've noticed. And we talk a lot about developer platforms. And it's funny, like, historically you say, what were the developer platforms? Well, there was the mainframe, and then there was the PC, and then at some point there was the web, and then there was mobile. And these are all sort of general purpose computing platforms. And they're all phenomenal platforms in terms of their scale and reach and ability to change the world. But something really interesting happens when you start to look at the world as a potential developer platform. When you walk down the street and you see a fire hydrant and you go, oh yeah, developer platform. Like, there's an app for that. I could build something for that. Someone at some point saw a scooter and said, hey, that's a developer platform. I could build something for that. And I want to share with you some lesser known examples, but ones that I think really exemplify this trend that I'm talking about. We have a customer who you will hear from tomorrow in our keynote called Sensonio. And Sensonio is a startup based out of Slovakia, small team, and they decided to solve a problem of inefficiency in waste collection. So I want to return to the metaphor of the cab driver that gets in the cab and drives around and around and around and around and hopes that they run into someone with their hand up. Well, this is actually how waste collection mostly works still today. Has always worked, mostly works still today. They refer to this as a milk run. I don't know if anyone here actually had milk delivered to their house by a milk truck growing up. I grew up in New Zealand, so we were just getting television from the 50s when I grew up. But we had milk trucks that would come, and the way it would work is they would just drive to the same houses every day, and they would bring you milk, whether you needed milk or not. So if you needed milk, it was great, you got milk. And if you already had milk, tough shit, now you got too much milk. And that is how a milk run worked. And basically, this is also how waste collection works. Someone gets in a truck, they drive around, they empty the bins that are full, they empty the bins that are empty, they empty the bins that are half empty. And so Sensonio, what they do is they put a very simple sensor into each receptacle. And what that allows them to do is to see the fill level, not just the fill level, but also the fill type. And then every day, a city or a waste management company can actually generate dynamically the routes that the drivers should be driving to go and empty these waste receptacles. It sounds really simple, it sounds really obvious, but this stuff is really not happening in most of the world and in most of the physical processes that exist in our economy. This is a new thing. And so what they do is you log in, you generate a route, and then that route actually gets sent to the driver's mobile phone in the form of turn-by-turn directions. So then the driver goes out, they get in their truck, and they actually get turn-by-turn directions. They don't know necessarily where they're going, and they go out and they empty just the bins that need emptied the most. So you could guess, like, okay, how much are they saving from doing this? And I think in my head, I probably would guess like maybe 5%, 10% of their energy. The cities that are participating in this system are cutting their carbon emissions by 60%. And I want you to think about what that might mean as a proxy for other metrics. Right? If you are a company that drives around in trucks and empties bins, what does it mean if your carbon emissions go down by 60%? It probably means you're driving 60% less of the time, which probably means you're saving 60% of your manpower, probably means you're saving 60% of your fuel costs. It probably means your business is significantly more efficient. Another way of thinking about it, though, is that doing things the old way, the milk run way, the just brute force approach to the physical world, 60% of your time is completely wasted. And 60% of your time can be saved by just bringing that context of the physical world into software and going from a system of guessing and assuming to a system of truth and knowledge and accuracy. This is another great example. I love it so much. It's a small company based out of San Francisco. We can actually, both of these companies actually are in our smart city downstairs. This is a 5-person company out of San Francisco. And what they have built, this is just one of those examples that probably most of us didn't even know existed. They found one of those milk run problems in the world, and it has to do with gas supply. So there's actually a lot of commercial applications for gas that you might not think about. Dentists' offices have gas. Bars have gas. There's like shipping and logistics companies and trucking companies that use different types of gases for various types of things. And again, the way that that industry used to work is you would say, I need this once a month, I need this once every 6 months, and if you ran out in 5.5 months, now we've got to figure that out, but more than likely, actually what you ended up with was a surplus. And so what Pulsar does is they provide a very small sensor, very general purpose. They actually have a few different form factors that they can give to anyone who's using gas products. And then the gas distributor, they use a little bit of ML and some predictive analytics, and the gas distributor knows, oh, what's on my to-do list today? I need to go to that dentist's office, I need to go to that bar, I need to take nitrous oxide, I need to take carbon dioxide. And again, what they have found here is that their participating customers are seeing a 40% saving in truck economics. So again, the old way, the milk run way, the brute force algorithm, 40% of the time that these people were spending on their business was a complete waste of time. This is happening. There are things happening. In fact, there's going to be 1 billion of these types of cellular, IoT, outside world connected devices that will be shipped this year. 4 years from now, that number is expected to be closer to 3 billion devices. And I want to spend just a few more minutes here talking about why it is that maybe now is the time that this is happening. And especially if you're an engineer, if you're a developer, why now is a really good time to start thinking about what more do I need to know, what more do I need to learn to go and maybe build a product, build a business line, or even build a company in this space. And it has to do with the components that go into a typical cellular connected device. So I have here on the screen a Lime scooter, and you can see that the components that go in here, you have the LTE modem and the SIM. You have a microcontroller unit, you have a GPS chip, you have a gyroscopic sensor, you have a lithium-ion battery. And it's probably not news to all of you that you also have all of these components in your pocket right now, most likely. In fact, you might have one copy of all of these components in your pocket and one in your bag. These components, 10 years ago, were extraordinarily expensive. Some of them were actually impossible to get. If you go back maybe 15 or 20 years, some of the components in here were reserved military only. Only military can buy these types of components. And if you could get them, they were probably worth a fortune. And it might have been worthwhile to buy them if you wanted to do something like track a truck that was shipping Fabergé eggs. But it probably wouldn't have been worth it to buy them to put into a scooter. The second thing, and this is a very, very similar reasoning, is that this experience here, this micromobility experience, and I'm sure many of you have engaged in these experiences, requires a user interface that exists everywhere. It is not particularly useful to have a shared on-demand scooter on every street corner if you have to run inside and go to your desk and log into a system in order to rent it. So I would say that all of these components were necessary to unlock this particular trend. And I want to talk about why now is the perfect time for that. There is this concept called peace dividends. And peace dividends are something that suggests the economic benefits that are derived when a war is over and you convert military production into civilian production. And this is actually, it's a little bit of a stretch, but bear with me. This term was coined by Bush Sr. and Margaret Thatcher. And I think this will be the only time at Signal that you hear anyone quote Margaret Thatcher, at least this year. And there's a guy who runs the TED conferences, and he coined this term, the peace dividends of the smartphone war, Chris Anderson. And his notion here is that actually the smartphone war is roughly over. The winners have been drawn. Apple appears to own the vast majority of the margin in the industry. Google and Samsung and a few others appear to own the vast majority of the user share in the industry. But over the last 10 years, while they fought this war, what happened was they built billions of smartphones. And all of those components that go into a smartphone, the sensors, the GPS, the ARM chips, the processors, the cellular module, the memory, the battery, all of those economies of scale were built by the incredible investment that Apple and Google and others were willing to make to go and win that particular war. There's sort of three examples here, I think, that really apply when we talk about why now for cellular IoT. The first is the hardware. I talked about that a lot. This stuff is cheap. You can go on Amazon. You can get a GPS chip for $2. It's pretty amazing. There's also the networks. The networks that we have available to us now as a result of this insane innovation in the smartphone space are phenomenal. They were unimaginable a few years ago. And then there's that notion, like I said, of the everywhere user interface. A lot of these solutions that we're talking about, particularly like the micromobility of the world, but even like the Sensonio of the world, for example, with the waste collection, they do require that there's this user interface everywhere for mobile users to adopt. And I would proclaim that it's the combination of these three things coming together right now that makes it an amazing time to be an IoT developer. This is one example we just talked about, the battery cost for a lithium-ion battery over the last 10 years, coming down exactly an order of magnitude. The same thing with GPS. I mentioned GPS, previously a military technology, now a few dollars. But there's also this notion of the mobile networks. The governments are freeing up huge amount of spectrum around the world to account for 5G networks. By 2022, 100% of the global population is expected to have access to some sort of low-power, wide-area network cellular connectivity. And there's density as well. In the 5G standards, for example, 5G requirements, I should say, there is a set of requirements that are specifically for massive machine-type communication. That is to say, this is the first time, as we go into 5G, that the industry is actually looking at humans and machines as equals in terms of how we set the requirements. And so as part of massive machine-type technology, there is a requirement, for example, that a network must be able to support 1 million devices per square kilometer. And to give you context on what that means that a network should be able to support about 150 million devices in a city the size of San Francisco. And so obviously that's a huge endorsement of the fact that the wireless industry at least believes there are going to be huge numbers of these machine-type devices connected to cell networks. This is the global smartphone user base. It's almost kind of a trite statistic. I don't really need to share it. But it does, again, give you that sense of, okay, if I'm going to go build something and it's going to be some IoT device that exists out in the world, I need users. Well, you've got a few billion users. I think you're in good shape there. But my point is that there is this perfect storm: hardware, networks, and users. And again, this makes it an amazing time to be an IoT developer. Today we talked about this IoT explosion, this explosion of use cases and devices and growth that is happening in IoT outside of the familiar smart home environment. We talked about how this creates entrepreneurial white space, how you can look at any object as you walk through the city and think, maybe I could make that more efficient, or maybe the world would be a better place if somehow we could use software to model that object or that process digitally. And we talked about why now is the perfect time to be jumping on this trend. It's not too early, There are tools available to you. We have that perfect storm of components, but it's also not too late. It's also not too late. There is so much opportunity out there. So much stuff is still being done the old way. There are still so many milk runs going on in almost every aspect of our physical lives. And I hope that you take away this message that the softwareization, the building of context around the physical world will enable developers like yourselves to disrupt economic processes that exist in the physical economy. That's all I have for you today. Thank you very much for sitting through this. Again, I want to call attention to all of the other content that we have going on for IoT at Signal. We have workshops. We had 200 developers show up yesterday and build their first ever IoT devices as part of Kedar, who's down here, is one of his workshops. We have 3 more workshops. And there is space in those. So if you've always wanted to build an IoT device or always wanted to play with hardware, or you never have, come and chat with Kedar. He can tell you when they're happening. We've got seats available, and we have many, many more talks as well, talking about our products, how we're helping developers in this space. Thank you very much.